Hey, this is Liz Bentley, and today I wanted to talk about giving advice. So, I'm kind of in the business of giving advice, being a coach. I listen to people, all day long talking about their challenges and their struggles, and I evaluate, thinking about their strengths and about their struggles, how they can work through issues and come to outcomes that they'd like to achieve. But I see a lot of flaws in giving advice and see people in general all the time giving advice that really is worthless or just doesn't work. So let's break that down and talk about it, because a lot of us are doing this or taking advice that doesn't make sense. So here are the three things I see people struggle with when it comes to giving advice. Number one, they give advice that just doesn't work. And they simplify it down to advice that seems simple, but it doesn't work. Number two, they give advice that they're not taking themselves. So they're saying, hey, do this, but they're not doing it. And number three, they're giving out advice that's not tested. It's not stuff, that's not advice they even understand. And it just sounds good. So they're putting it out there. Okay, so let's break each one of those down and give examples. The first one I said was giving advice that doesn't work and simplifies it into something that's not really the issue. So I'm going to give an example of that, and that is losing weight. I have the most amazing advice on how to lose weight, and it will work for every single human. And it's one simple thing: just stop eating less. So think about it. The obesity problem in our country can get solved with my one piece of advice. Everyone just needs to eat less. Right? Doesn't that sound simple? And we could get more complicated with it. Like, eat more fruits and vegetables, blah, 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 blah. So why does that advice not work? Because the problem is a lot more complicated than that simple advice. And see, we do that all the time. And we say to people, just, go in and deal with that problem head on. Or just fire that person because they're not working out. Or why don't you stop being so controlling and delegate more? You don't need to be such a perfectionist. That advice all sounds so simple, and it probably will work, just like eating less will work. And yet we can't take it. So why? Because there is a bigger issue going on. Losing weight isn't about food, okay? Letting go of perfectionism isn't just about being able to delegate, okay? All of these issues are much deeper and much more complicated, and in order to solve them, simple advice just isn't going to work. Okay, let's go to the second one. That's where we are giving advice that we are not taking. Now, if this advice is so good, why wouldn't we take it? So here's what we do, for example. Our colleague comes into us and says, I'm having a problem with the boss, and I'm just really frustrated. And we say, well, tackle that head on. Call the boss on the phone, get on a Zoom call with them, and tell them exactly how you feel. They should know how you feel. Well, if you're not taking that advice yourself, maybe that's not the best course of action. Maybe the frustration the employee is having should be thought through a little bit more. Maybe they should think about the boss's perspective. Maybe they should figure out what is their own issue in it. There's all kinds of things that should be considered here. And if you wouldn't even take that advice, I would suggest you don't give it out. And then the last one is advice that hasn't been tested. We give this all the time. What we'll say to someone, you've just got to be able to ask for your needs. It's so important to ask for your needs. And yet you can't ask for your needs. If you're somebody who has struggled with asking for your needs and now you've gotten really good at it, you can give advice on how to get better at asking for your needs and overcome the blocks that are getting in your way. Or if you're someone who's figured out how to not be passive aggressive and instead be assertive when a problem comes up and work through it, then you can give great advice on your experience of working through something hard. But if you're just randomly throwing out advice like, oh yeah, don't, ruminate over a problem, just, try to think a happy thought, that doesn't work. And if you've tried to test it, it will prove to you can't just think a happy thought and think all your problems go away, because they don't. It's really advice that doesn't work. And so we see people all the time giving out advice that it just doesn't work, and they've never even tried to test it. So here's what we want to do. Let's just remember what we want to do. Number one, we want to always remember we're working on ourselves. So rather than even thinking about giving advice to everyone else, look in the mirror and figure out what's the advice you need to be taking to work on yourself. Number two, always look for the deeper issue. What's really going on here? What is really at the root of this problem? It's never as simple as just eating less. I mean, if it is, then you figured it out. But if that strategy hasn't worked, then you need to figure out what the real problem is. Number three, test stuff out. I mean, if you realize that you need to learn to delegate more, then try different stuff out and see what works. And work it out on yourself first before you start giving advice for everyone else to make changes that you haven't even tried out in your own laboratory. And don't be afraid to try stuff out and see what works and what doesn't. This is how we constantly improve ourselves. So I do believe that advice can be helpful, but I also think we have to be really thoughtful about what kind of advice we give out. And I would highly suggest don't ever give out advice you can't take yourself, because maybe it's just the wrong advice or it just doesn't work. Otherwise, you would have done it. So thanks so much, and we will see you next Tuesday. Great.